We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are really all melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And today we're really excited to welcome our next guest, Kristie Rodenbush. She's the Chief Human Resources Officer at Algolia. Kristie, how's your day going?
It's going great. Thank you. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, start of the week. If you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and what are you currently excited about working on at Algolia?
Absolutely. So again, my name's Kristie. She, her, and hers are my pronouns. Algolia is in hypergrowth stage, so we are hiring a ton. The talent market is changing rapidly, so trying to adjust and, literally on the dime, really figure out what the barriers are to hiring the candidates we want and fix it. So that's probably it's definitely the most exciting hiring environment I've ever been in. I think the piece of work that I'm the most excited about is really kind of the next evolution of Algolia. We've brought in almost an entirely new leadership team, new CEO that's been here a year, that's really reinvigorated the business. And I feel like the sky's the limit. So there's going to be so many more people-related actions that come out of our evolving strategy. We just became a multi-product company. So there's just a lot of exciting things happening in the people space. In particular, bringing people back to the offices is going to be fascinating, tough, interesting, exhausting, all of the verbs. We have chosen a hybrid remote strategy, and we're about to bring that to life with the employees, and really figuring out what the kinks are, where it's working, where it's not working. In those first few months, I think it's just going to be a super interesting piece of work for anyone in HR.
Yeah, absolutely. Building the ship as you are on it as well. And I know that's a lot of what people are talking about in terms of, flexible work and return to the office in some sense. Just going back, what motivated you to lead the kind of HR function at Algolia? I know you have a lot of experience in the space. Did you always know that you wanted to be a CHRO leading the function, and, specifically Algolia's company culture? What attracted you to it?
Yeah, I've always wanted to be a CHRO, so that's definitely clear. I think if you look at my resume, I started working in consulting, and then I worked for really enormous, and when I say enormous, I mean like many hundreds of thousands of people or employee companies, and have gradually gotten smaller. Mm-hmm. And so this is my first foray into venture capital backed company. So that was really exciting to see, the way venture capital gets involved and how investors look at a business is different than public companies, certainly, or private equity held companies. So that was a huge piece of it. I have a pretty large remit here, so that was also super attractive. I own it, my role is people and places. So I also get the privilege of owning internal comms, real estate and employee experience, DE&I, of course, HR, recruiting, and I'm forgetting the sixth thing, corporate social responsibility. So to get to play out of my classic HR swim lane has been really fun, and it's been really rewarding.
Absolutely. It sounds like there is a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces, CSR, D&I, and the employee experience. And I think that people and places really encompasses company culture on a more granular level. How are you thinking about defining company culture right now?
Yeah, to me, company culture is how things get done. How does work get done? What is the flow of information? What is the flow of work? And all the behaviors that go into that. And we've had a really strong culture since the founders built the company. In fact, that was really the nucleus of how they built Algolia, was around culture, and then figured out and fine-tuned what the product was going to be, kind of, in concert with that. So culture has been incredibly critical here all along. And it's evolved a bit since we've had our new CEO join. We've really strong brand awareness in Europe, and our revenues were higher in Europe, and we're seeing that shift as we realize that there's a lot of customers in the US, and we've got our HQ in the US. We've had it here for quite a while, and have built our executive team around the HQ here in the US. So I think the culture's evolving. We are trying to pick up a little bit of speed as well. We've got some tremendous tailwinds from COVID. I hate to say that there's a silver lining, but at least for Algolia, since e-commerce is our main vertical, there were some tremendous tailwinds through COVID and continue to be. So the business is really, really performing. And so I think with that comes speed. We had to figure out how to recruit, 6 times the amount of people than we were previously recruiting in the same amount of time. And we've been very successful at doing that, which I'm very proud of the recruiting team. They've done an amazing job. So I think the core of the culture is still there. Our 5 core values: grit, trust, care, humility, huge one. Those are all still there, but I think we're getting more customer centric and trying to pick up speed as well on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as a global organization that's growing, and like you said, new leadership and a lot of things going on, a lot of things on the roadmap as well, internally and externally for customers. How do you think about really like employee engagement, like meeting employees where they are? You mentioned a hybrid approach, and how do you practice that on your team at Algolia?
Absolutely. So our hybrid approach, of course, we haven't put that into place yet because we've still been out of offices, with the exception of certain locations like Paris and New York, where we've got a lot of employees that really wanted to come into the office because their flats were so small or they shared them with roommates. Kind of the same story, a lot of employers have had in certain geographies, but most of our offices have remained closed. As we kind of roll out the plan around remote, hybrid remote, which to us means the majority of employees are either going to be fully remote, coming in once a month-ish, or, at the most 2 to 3 days per week. We don't expect anyone back in the office 5 days a week is the plan. So that's going to be different, but frankly, we've been incredibly successful over the last year plus being fully remote. So we expect this to be, a positive experience as well. We do have employees that, this is a big social outlet coming to work. So we want to make sure that still is available. We're keeping all of our offices. In fact, we may add an office as well. We're going to be shifting around the furniture, shifting around the desking, really making it more of a collaborative space so that teams can use it as an opportunity to come in and really connect, which I'm sure you're hearing from a lot of employers as well. And so we'll see over the next 6 months how this rolls out. I think it's going to be a phased rollout by geography. We're now in 8 countries, soon to be 9, and they're all at different phases of infection rates as well as vaccination rates. So it's not going to be a flip the switch and everybody's back on in the office at the same pace.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely hearing, even when folks are returning to the office, even if it's a few days a week and, you are there certain days with your team and not the design of the office will look different. But again, like the office space has been a place where folks definitely like to interact and speak with people as well, especially if you don't have like a good work from home place too. When you are developing out that strategy with the team, how are you thinking about making sure that employees felt psychologically safe and just like coming back to work as well?
So we're doing a lot of things to really level the playing field. We do not want there to be a remote world and an in-office world of employees or a group of employees. So we're looking at a lot of different things, potentially moving all of our in-office perks that had cost associated with them. So things like lunches, breakfasts, fitness, commute support, into a stipend card. So employees are able to use it, for whatever they want to use it for. And it would be a consistent global amount across the country or across all of our countries. We're looking at certainly the promotion process. We need to make sure that there are there's no signs of favoritism, as well as in the performance process, that we're really we've got managers and all of our exec team really got their eye out for unconscious bias and not disproportionately reserving benefits, perks, promotions, all of the good stuff that employees experience for those that come into the office. My gut tells me we aren't going to have as huge of a problem with that. We've got an incredibly high integrity team. Our exec team, our employees are some of the highest integrity folks I've ever worked with. So I'm really proud to say that. 2, we've done quite a bit of work in the last year on unconscious bias training, and really we've brought in a lot of expert speakers on how to shift mindset and think differently about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And we've done really well being a remote company. So I think people have a lot of respect for everyone's individual circumstances. We had lots of parents that were having a lot of challenges, particularly up front during COVID. And they're, the company really embraced them, and other employees that were having challenges with, either being at home or being in an office or working full time, or, of course, there were mental health challenges as well. So I think we've got a company that really supports each other, and maybe I'm being an optimist, but I go pretty well.
No, I think that's important, and it's good, and it speaks to a culture of trust as well. When employees are giving that feedback and sharing, the challenges that they are going through, whether it's caretaking or you are working from home and you really don't have the space or things like that. How do you kind of think about collecting that feedback, especially as we were fully remote this past year, from employees? What tools do you use, and how do you meet employees wherever they are in the world?
Yes, I think there's 3 main avenues. 1, we certainly do engagement surveys like most companies do. We use Culture Amp, love Culture Amp. We do 2 or 3 surveys a year, 1 big one with the full action planning and focus groups to follow, and then 1 or 2 pulse surveys as well. So it was number 1. And both of the surveys that we ran last year, we added quite a few COVID support questions. So really getting feedback on what employees were experiencing, and they were our highest performing scores. We were in the top 90s across the company on how we were supporting employees through COVID. Second avenue, we use AllVoices, which is a tool that we've come to love. And it's just the fact that your tool has built this anonymous bidirectional communication is just awesome. So we do get feedback quite a bit that they aren't issues that would have ever risen to a hotline or a whistleblower type caliber, but they're people that aren't comfortable putting their name next to their comments, but they have a lot of comments to share.
Right.
So we do get a lot of great use out of that. Of course, we have, Q&A, and we use Slido for that at our all hands. And then the third big bucket is really our HRBPs. We've got HRBPs in supporting all of our functions. And a big part of their role is to keep a pulse on the employees and what they're thinking and what they're saying and what they're hearing, and being accessible for employees to volunteer that information.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a very holistic, and that's really great to hear, just like positive feedback about AllVoices, but it's not just, one strategy. It's part of a whole approach of really employee listening. And we're hearing all the time that employees have feedback. It's just whether you're getting it or not. But I would love to ask too, why is it important, and how do you see this manifesting in a culture of trust and inclusion for employees? Why do you think it's so important to really intentionally foster at Algolia?
I want to add one other point to your earlier question before I forget. It's also, frankly, more important than any of it, it's managers. It's having managers really foster a nurturing, open door. You can tell me whatever you want to tell me, and there won't be ramifications. Let's have an honest, open conversation about whatever your concerns are. That is the primary source of feedback. So the others are really supplementary to that. But your question, can you repeat your question for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Why is it important to really build that trust and really get that employee feedback? How do you see that manifesting in the workplace?
I think, trust is all we got as humans. If you think about it, it all comes down to trust in our personal relationships and our professional relationships. I'm a big believer that companies, particularly in Silicon Valley and more so in the US, but it's growing, elsewhere. People are loyal to people, not necessarily to companies. And so it's, when you find someone you can trust and you can really communicate well with, and, I've worked with colleagues and bosses and mentors where we just kind of have to grunt and we know what we mean. When you've established that level of rapport, life is just much more enjoyable. And for work, things are a lot more efficient, and we get accurate information, and we can correct on a dime, if we can, whatever the source of the problem is. So, trust is really the basis of getting feedback and being able to act on it and having those healthy connections. If you look at the data over what really drives engagement, I know this sounds corny, but it's having a best friend at work, or having several good friends at work. And makes such a huge difference. The happiest times in my career have been when I've had really good friends as colleagues. And I'm a big believer in that. So the more we can foster that, that's great. And trust is a huge piece of it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It comes down to trust and those healthy relationships at work. I would definitely agree that the people that I enjoy sitting next to and that are on my teams, or that I can Slack about work related and non work related things, are, it just makes the experience so much better for everyone. And it really does impact the bottom line of the business as well, like you mentioned too. The point that you added on around managers and their kind of responsibility to get that feedback and really build trust within their teams as well, and one-on-one. Do you feel that the role of leaders, whether they're in the C-suite or people managers, have changed over this past year? Is there more of a responsibility to really, create that on the team?
I don't know that there's more responsibility. I think it's always been there. It's always been a huge source of, or it's a, top 3 responsibility as a people manager or leader. I just think it's gotten a little more difficult for some. Others have eased into the remote work effortlessly and their teams effortlessly, but others not. And so I think for some, it just took, rejiggering how they really manage their calendar and how they, we use Slack as our IM tool. So really, are you checking in with your people on not just where is this deliverable, but how are you? Like, how are you? Somebody asked me the other day, felt like Meghan Markle when the paparazzi asked her how she was doing and she almost started crying. Somebody asked me, how are you doing? Like, how are you doing? And I stepped back and I was like, wow, no one has asked me that in a year. I mean, they've asked me superficially, of course,
Right.
but like deeply, how are you truly handling all of this? How, what is its effect on you and your family and your sanity and your sleep and all of those things? And it's important that managers build that kind of rapport with people as much as possible. You're not always going to connect with every employee you have on a level that you can do that, but the most effort you can put in to try to build those relationships with your people, it pays off. And so I think, back to your question specifically, I think there have been managers where it hasn't been a big change. They were always output focused, results oriented. And some managers who, whether it was across the board or just for certain roles, were a little more face time. They were measuring face time and measuring input more. And so the shift to really just being results oriented and making sure, what you commit to delivering is getting delivered on time and with quality. So I think it's been a mix for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that you can tell when someone is waiting for you to respond with, good, like, let's get onto the agenda, or you're just like, how actually are you doing? I want to hear your answer, and also respond and listen, not think about what I'm going to say next. And I think the role of managers to really show employees that they are seen and they're heard is really important as well. I wanted to go back to one of the earlier points you made too around Algolia's work around unconscious bias and diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially over this past year as well. What does kind of the DEI bucket of your strategy look like as well?
Yeah, so we have several buckets. I think, first, if you look at hiring, we are trying and succeeding in casting a wider net. So really, what you're hearing from a lot of companies, taking away the college requirement for certain jobs, taking down the number of years, at least on the job spec, really looking for skills versus experiences, really emphasizing behavioral interviewing to test for those skills, using simulations and assessments. Virtually, probably at least 80% of our roles in the interview process, someone has to complete an assignment of some sort. And so really looking for evidence of the ability to complete that type of work. And also, I think, we are currently questioning, should we be setting targets by function and by geography for various levels of diversity? And what should those be? I will say overall, we've got a really good representation of females. I'm pretty happy with it. I want to see it go up several more points, but overall it's pretty healthy. I think certainly in engineering it needs to increase, but every company on the planet would say that, so that's not unusual. ERGs, so we have 5 ERGs, and we've really empowered them with budget and effort to decide what their scope is going to be and run with it. Our HRBPs and our managers, we really emphasize, unconscious bias a lot. So really checking for those biases, like I mentioned earlier, in any sort of employee action, whether it's internal abilities, true promotions, performance, all of that. Looking at metrics, we particularly focus on the delta between female and male engagement when we run those scores, and looking at what other metrics we should have as well. We definitely want to be leading edge there. We spent a lot of effort and money and time last year in response to all of the racial atrocities, bringing in both expert-led speakers. I think we brought in 4 over different instances on different topics to really help drive a mindset shift. And then we also did quite a bit of training on unconscious bias, as well as feedback with a lens for bias. So those were required courses for the whole company. And we had a particularly fantastic facilitator for those that really got people engaged. But to me, if you could say there's a silver bullet in DE&I and belonging, it's really that mindset shift. And I saw it happen last year with myself, with all of the horrible things that happened in the world. I saw myself become more sensitive to the topic. So we really want to figure out how else we can breed that in our employees, and how else we could help them on that journey. We give particular attention to our truth tellers here. So we want to make sure that our truth tellers, they need to be respectful in how they tell the truth. We don't want them to, call somebody's baby ugly, but we really listen to them. AllVoices is a great tool that helps us do that as well, because it is anonymous. But ideally, we want our truth tellers to not have to be anonymous, and to be able to share their name and share their identity and bring their whole self to work, and make sure that there isn't any worry about retribution, and that we're going to take action, most importantly, on what we hear, particularly when there's data with it. And then, of course, we do the gender pay equity analysis and all the fixes required for that. Luckily, we didn't have many last year, and I'm just about to run it for this year.
That's great. I think the mindset shift, what you kind of emphasized, is really important, because it's not only thinking about internally, but a mindset shift can happen outside of work as well, and bringing it into work. And I think in a way that we can't separate our personal selves and our work selves. A lot of deep DE&I work really is helpful, no matter what level you're at or whatever job function. And the training and the events that you mentioned, employee resource groups build community. It's a really kind of 360 approach to doing that. So I think that definitely makes sense. And a lot of what kind of potential employees are looking for as well is that deep work and intentional strategy. Right now in the work that you're doing in people and HR, are you seeing any kind of trends that you think that companies as well as individuals need to pay attention to and act on in order to be successful in the future of work that we're building today?
There are so many trends right now. We're, I think, early in the year with our big hiring plan, really looking at, wow, so many people want to be working remote in what I would call tier 2 or tier 3 cities, so much smaller cities that don't have as much of an economy, and want to be paid San Francisco prices. So how do we handle that? I think, most companies are dealing with that as well. I'm seeing both at Algolia as well as my peers in the same job at other companies, HR, we can create so many programs and so much content to help with things like mindset shift, or talent reviews and succession planning and people strategies, but and frameworks for how to bring people back into the office. But if the business is so busy that they can't embrace the work and do the work, it doesn't get done. And so one of the trends that I'm seeing is, HR is right there, willing and ready and excited to help participate and drive so much, but the business, with whether COVID has hit you positively or negatively, and just, the market being on fire and SPACs and all the things that are happening, our business is just incredibly busy. And I think I hear that from my peers as well. So it's really absorbing the information and the work that we'd like to deliver. I think that's one of the trends. It's hard to find that balance. And then I think, at a company at our size, so we're about 400 people, FTEs, more than that in total workforce. Soon enough, we'll be large enough that at our stage, every 50 hires kind of resets our identity.
Yeah.
We have to, I'm not going to say it resets our culture, because our culture is very well defined, but once you get bigger, into the thousands, it's, every 300 hires or something. There's some great HR philosophers who have those numbers memorized. But for us at our size, every 50 hires, we shift our identity. And so it's about finding the balance between the culture that we intend and that we architected intentionally, and what those great 50 hires, because we're trying to hire the very best, as is everyone, what they're bringing, and how do we merge those two. So I think that's a big trend as well. Certainly, I'll speak to it at the size of the company that we're at.
Especially for a company that's in hyper growth mode and bringing on folks that are all over the world as well. I think bridging those two kind of philosophies definitely makes sense. And a lot of companies are asking themselves questions around that. And there's so many kind of priorities that are happening right now. So I think that definitely is helpful for folks to know. I know at the top of our interview, you mentioned you always wanted to be a CHRO, and you're doing it right now, but is there anything, knowing, having the knowledge and experience that you have now, you would like give advice to your younger self that you were like just starting out in your career, maybe your first or second job?
I was definitely too independent in my younger years, and didn't, I love the teams that I connected with and built great friendships. Some of my greatest friends are from my early days of work. But when it came to battling and really tackling a hard problem at work, I would kind of take it on my own. And I got some great advice many years ago from a mentor who told me, when you've got something tough that you're dealing with, bring people into the trenches with you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to solve it on your own. And so I think that would be, a huge piece of advice to my earlier self is be a little less independent. I mean, it's great to be self-directed. You got to find your own work. It's great to not need a ton of direction once you know what you're doing, but there's a point where you've got to really embrace and bring others with you, particularly when you're struggling with, a big challenge.
Absolutely. There are people that have probably gone through similar experiences or just could bring their experiences to you as well. And there's an art to that collaboration, but also, like you said, if there's a problem, coming in with your own solution, but being open to hearing others is super important as well. So I think that's great. I know that we discussed a lot of different topics, but is there anything that we didn't discuss that you would like to share with the folks who are listening right now, whether they're interested in joining the Algolia team or, any of the talks we discussed?
Well, I'll certainly make my pitch for Algolia. We are growing like gangbusters in lots and lots of markets and lots of remote roles. Also lots of in-office roles, or partially in-office, I should say. So if you're interested, we are defining and redefining and expanding the space of search and discovery for enterprises. It's a really high integrity place to work, which is a real pleasure. It makes my job a lot easier as well, selfishly. And we've got some really smart, interesting people who have very diverse backgrounds. And it's a real pleasure to have, the 5 minutes that you can capture to have the personal conversations. We've just got some people that have had amazing lives. So I think it's a great time to join in particular, not just the place, but a great time in our trajectory. I think the message I would give to people that are starting out in HR or considering HR, when I was in college, considering HR was, it took me a year to try to decide what I wanted to do. It's a phenomenal profession. So whether you choose recruiting, they're almost always going to have a job. And the line between recruiting and business impact is direct and undeniable. And that if that's something that's rewarding to you, that's a phenomenal career. HR, I think a phenomenal career, and just so much opportunity for smart, curious, growth mindset folks to join and help companies transform and deal with some of the issues that we've talked about. I don't think either college counselors or just not enough people know about how awesome being in HR and recruiting and all the offshoots of people in places is. So if that's my other plug, it would be to young folks or folks that are considering a career change. It's a phenomenal career.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think one of the things that we definitely discuss on Reimagining Company Culture is just the role of HR or what people think of it as. I think HR and just people in general can have a really huge impact on the business because you're interacting with everybody who joins and you have, a really good sense of where the business is going. So I think that is a great call to action and a good note to end on. Kristie, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon at the beginning of the week to speak with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. And as a reminder, at AllVoices, we believe in the power of everyone to speak up at your organization and believe it's a requirement in order for everyone to succeed. Speak soon.